right, well, welcome everyone. We've got a real good one here today. We're going to talk again about a little Vietnam action. So we are extremely pleased to have with us today Lieutenant Colonel Dan Petkunas, United States Air Force retired. Okay, following F-4 training in 1971 at George Air Force Base, not too far up the road in Victorville, Dan volunteered to go to Vietnam, where he joined the 13th Tactical Fighter Squadron, the Panther Pack, and flew over 200 combat missions, becoming a very skilled and experienced and veteran F-4 weapons system officer, or WISO. Okay, in addition to many intense combat missions, his tour in Vietnam included an ejection and night water landing, and then having to spend several days on an aircraft carrier. Okay, he also became a very proficient high-speed paint burning specialist. You have to ask him about that one.
They won't have to ask.
Okay, he's going to, over the course of his 24-year career, Lieutenant Colonel Petkunas earned 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses and 18 air medals. Pertinent to us today, he has since retiring shared his very entertaining experiences to numerous audiences around our country. So here to share with us some of his Vietnam stories, please welcome a highly decorated warrior, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Petkunas.
Does this work? Can you hear me? Yep, okay. Morning, everyone. Feedback. Let's see. I'm here today to talk to you about combat flying, specifically the training that went into it, plus the thrills we had during training. And this, is, of course, is all about Vietnam. I'd like to start off with some recognition. First, my wife. She'll be wandering around, taking photographs. Got my 2 sons here, too, that came up from Orange County. Army veterans. Cool. Marines. Air Force. Coast Guard? No Coast Guard. Well, I too thank you for your service, because without your support, and literally thousands of people, I would not have been able to do my job. Now, right now, somebody should be thinking, what happened to the Navy? He forgot the Navy. Navy veterans. There you go. There you go. I've got a special story for you at the end of my presentation. And that will be, it starts out about the Air Force, but then Navy ends up being the hero. So, you notice I don't have any notes, no teleprompter. I'm going to be telling you stories that you'll remember. And I might stumble along the way, but then you know it's a live presentation. I used to be younger. I often give these presentations to university ROTC cadets. So one of my stories, I start out with an office story, because I try to help them understand there's a difference between a military job and a civilian job. When I was in the Air Force, I was assigned to a large office building over in El Segundo, overlooking LAX, a beautiful office. And late on a Friday afternoon, one thing, our responsibilities from that office encompassed military operations, an aspect of military operations over 7 western states. So we had a great deal of responsibility. But late on a Friday afternoon, the general calls my boss, says, "Send Dan up." 3 words. My boss comes in, says, "I don't know what he wants, but he wants you now." So I go upstairs. As I'm going in his office door, he's coming out. "Come with me." 3 more words. Takes me down into another department, policy and procedures. Had never been on that floor before, didn't know exactly what they did. But he gathers up all the folks, about 25 people in a department, and him and I are standing in front of all these folks, and this is exactly what he said, 100% of what he said. Dan's your new boss. And he turns around and walks out. A few minutes later, I'm standing in my new office, kind of scratching my head. Phone rings. It's the general. Oh, I forgot to tell you. At 8 o'clock Monday morning, you're leading an inspection of the San Francisco office. I tell this to the cadets because you take responsibilities, whatever is given to you, and you run with it and show them what you've got. That's all you can do. When you separate from the military, oftentimes you get a "I love myself" display. This happens to be mine. About half of those are from Vietnam. One towards the bottom there was from that office job. This is the F-4. Notice where the pilot is. Right there, pilot, right? I'm 5 feet behind him. And no self-respecting, university-educated Air Force officer wants to be in the back seat of anything. But I had just a little bit of measure of satisfaction, knowing that if the pilot screwed up, he was going to die first. This is a typical formation we used when we flew somewhere casually. When we went into combat, the distance between the top plane and the bottom plane would be about a mile. And that's allowed some visibility for the pilots to cover everybody else in the flight. Story on that coming. This is the back seat. You notice the yellow along the bottom. I had stick, throttle, rudders. I had everything that I needed to fly the plane, which I did frequently. Along the right side, they've got it covered up in this slide, but those are navigation controls. Bombing parameters up across the top. You see there in the center, the orange was the radar scope. The F-4 was designed by the Navy back in the early 50s. And the admirals and the strategists at that point thought there weren't going to be any more dogfights like there were in World War II and in Korea. You were going to pick up the enemy on radar, you'd shoot a missile at him, and that'd be the end of the engagement. The Navy had a big radar scope. The Air Force thought a little bit differently, and they made the radar scope smaller, and that allowed room to put a stick in the back seat. And when the Air Force initially started flying the F-4s, they had a pilot in the front and a pilot in the back. And gradually over the years, they converted the back seat to weapon systems. Over on your left side, do you see the yellow star there? That's an aircraft, a piece of the aircraft frame that's actually exposed in the cockpit. We always wore gloves when we flew, because if you happened to touch that when we were at combat speed, it was hotter than a stovetop. Story coming on that. Do we have anybody here who's claustrophobic? One willing to admit it. Okay. Okay, we're going to sit down and strap into the F-4 right now. You get in the seat, you put straps, Velcro straps around both ankles, and that's in case of an ejection. You're pulling the legs, the straps pull you back in so they're not cut off by the canopy frame. Then you put on your seatbelt, shoulder harnesses, which connect you to both the seat and the parachute. Then you plug in your G-suit. Then you plug in your electrical, allowing us to talk on the radio. And then you plug in your oxygen. And then your oxygen mask comes on, the visor comes down, the canopy comes down, And you better hope at that point you're not claustrophobic. You are locked in. You're very much a part of the plane. Now let's talk about that stick in the back seat, the one the Navy didn't have. When we were flying around casually, I normally keep my right hand over on the navigation controls. When we went into combat, I'd move my hand over and keep it on top of the stick. Lightly, a couple fingers. I always knew where the stick was as the pilot maneuvered. Let's say it takes a half a second to move from the navigation controls over to the stick. Y'all remember back in high school, running the mile? How long did it take you? 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes? At combat speed, we'd do a mile in 6 seconds. That 6 seconds, if you do the math, that half a second translates to more than 400 feet. I have a wife somewhere and 2 boys because I eliminated that half a second response time. Story coming. Front seat, self-explanatory. Pilots and weapons usually harassed each other in the squadron. When we got in the plane, it was all teamwork and all business. When I went through F-4 training, 6 months worth of training, all out at George Air Force Base in Victorville. And towards the end of the 6 months, a couple of officers from personnel came over and asked us, hey, where do you want to go? Where's the next assignment? There were 21 of us in the class, and 19 of us volunteered for Vietnam. Now understand that Vietnam had F-4 bases, but so did Thailand. Thailand was a vacation spot to those stationed in Vietnam. Friendly people, terrific food, good facilities. Vietnam was exactly the opposite. So 19 of us volunteered for Vietnam, and 2 guys volunteered to go to England. And the lieutenant from personnel looked over at the major from personnel. The 2 guys came up to the front. He took them off into the corner. It was a small room. We were all intently listening. He starts out whispering. He says, you 2 guys volunteered to fly the F-4. Do you remember what the F stands for? F stands for fighter. We have a war going on in Vietnam and you 2 want to go to England. 19 of us went to the vacation spot. 2 went to Vietnam. Don't screw with personnel. After the 6 months in Victorville, they sent us to 3 survival schools. Basic survival up in Washington State, water survival down in Florida, and then jungle survival in the Philippines. There's a shot from basic survival in Washington. We were decked out like that, camouflaged, and they put us in a bus and they gave us some tents. They said, go out into the woods, camouflage your tent so that we can't find it. So everybody did this, and I worked on mine for a while, and I really did a lousy job. I'm standing back 30 or 40 feet looking at the tent, and then I hear someone coming. I look over, and it's the instructor. And I slowly move my white face away from him, and I hear his footsteps coming up. Stops right in front of me. And I'm thinking, oh man, I'm dead. And I look at him and he's got his back to me. He's looking at the tent. And then he starts doing this. He's looking for me. That camouflage works. On this next slide, sit quietly and just raise your hand when you see it. Raise your hand when you see it. We got 3. That's it. F-4, in flight. See, the camouflage works, except when it doesn't. Jungle survival. They put us in the infamous bus again. They said, go out and hide so that we can't find you. So I did that. I was all camouflaged and everything. I got deep in some foliage. There was no way he was going to be able to see me. And what the Air Force did was they hired some local Filipinos and the Negritos that would go out and find all of these airmen. And I heard those infamous steps in the brush again, and I'm just sitting still. And he comes right up to my bush, he parts it, he smiles, he's got a tooth missing. He didn't speak English, but he's got a translation card. So he shows me the card and he points to number 3. I smelled your boots. The smell of the jungle and the smell of black shoe polish. So I think guys in the Army did not use the soap and the shampoos that were sent from home. The ROTC cadets often include 15 or 20% female, so I throw this in. There's many more opportunities for ladies in the military today than there were back in the 70s. F-15 crews. Only about 15% of the Air Force actually flies. So there's 85% of the folks that go into the Air Force are in support of the assets of the Air Force. Assets sometimes sit there for years without being used, and they're required to maintain those assets to the point where if they are needed, they work. This happens to be an injection seat. Story coming. In Thailand at the base we were at, we basically had 2 missions. One was dropping bombs. And this was one of our most cherished of missions, was the support of the Army troops. They were tired, hungry, caked with mud perhaps about to get overrun, and they'd call in for air support. And we'd drop our bombs as close to the front line as we could. And I can't tell you over the years how many handshakes and bear hugs that I've received from the Army troops when they find out what I did. This is an AC-130. It shoots 25 millimeter rounds out the side. It's got rockets on it. It's got artillery shells on it. It's got flares on it. Usually they fly at night. They'd be blacked out, and we'd go up and rendezvous with them. We were also blacked out. We just rendezvous on the radio. And all of a sudden, out of the blackness, we'd see these tracers flying through the air, hitting something on the ground. And sometimes there'd be a secondary explosion. And he says, put your bombs right there. And we'd drop our bombs and go home. We never saw him, and he never saw us. The other role we had, besides dropping bombs, was air-to-air against enemy aircraft. This is an extremely challenging environment to do this. Picture yourself playing chess, and then that chess going to 3-dimensional chess. And then instead of just having 2 players, that there was other players allowed to come and go as make their move and leave. That's how complex it was. Of course, a great deal of fun. At the base I was at in Thailand, we had a squadron of reconnaissance F-4s. And it was their job that after the bombers hit a target the previous day, they'd go get pictures to make sure that the target had been destroyed. And all they had, they didn't have any weapons with them. All they had was cameras. So they would assign 2 F-4s with weapons to go as escorts for them to help protect them from the enemy aircraft. So on this particular, it was an early Sunday morning, I was assigned to an escort, a flight of 2 reconnaissance F-4s, and then there were 2 fighters. And we went up to the target area, everything's so quiet, nothing happening on the radio, no MiGs coming up, no missiles, no AAA, no nothing. Very quiet. And we're going in low level. And we're approaching the target, and as usual, I'm trying to cover our 6, but checking back there that there's no MiGs approaching, and I swing around and cover the other and cover the flight and whatnot. And this particular time, I happened to look out the front during the transition, and all I saw were trees. Where was my hand? You bet. Yank back on that stick, over the trees we went. We wouldn't have hit the hill, but we would have gone through the trees on top of the hill. So we continued on with the mission, got the pictures, got back to the base. We went to debrief, as we always do after the missions. And while we were debriefing, intelligence went out to the planes, scooped up the film. It was real film at that time. Took it into the lab, developed it, made some 8x10s, and came over to debrief. One of the guys threw some 8x10s on the table. I grabbed one of them and said, "Oh man, are we going to have to go back and do this again? What are all these white splotches all over the film?" He says, "The film's fine. Those were muzzle flashes." Yes, it was early Sunday morning. They knew we were coming. They were ready, and they missed. The invisible B-2. It usually flies at night, and because of the dark color, and it doesn't pick up any, you can't see it on radar either, they thought that they wouldn't be in much danger. They were virtually invisible. And because of that, they didn't have to go very fast. They top out about 550. Me, I like afterburners. You know, no afterburners there. We were on a mission in Vietnam where, you know, if you point the nose of a plane downwards, it really picks up speed. And you hit the afterburners at the same time and it goes like hell. And we ended up doing this on one of our missions. We got back to the base and we were pulling into the chocks, and we see the crew chief do this. Get the engines off, canopy open. "What's wrong, Chief?" He said, "What'd you do to my plane?" We had burned the paint off the wings and the nose of the aircraft. We like speed. In training after Vietnam, we were restricted, for safety reasons, to fly in low levels at 500 feet. The generals thought that was low level. It wasn't. And many discussions as to trying to get them to lower that, but you know, safety purposes, peacetime. At the same time, they were analyzing the aircraft losses in Vietnam. And they came to realize that most of the aircraft losses and the aircrew losses happened during the first 10 missions that the crew was over there. Kind of an orientation time. And so they set up this exercise at Nellis in Las Vegas called Red Flag, and the intent was to make it as realistic as possible and have us fly the way we were going to fight during the exercise, which meant no 500 or 250-foot minimums. And there was a 4-ship flying casually, and leads started taking us down and down and down. The lead went down to the point where he merged with his shadow. We were looking down on the top of his plane, and we were at 19 feet. Yes, it's dangerous down there, but so is getting shot at. Let's say he's at about 25 feet. He was before he started the turn. Now he's got 15 feet of wing out there. And I can't help but notice the fence over. Yeah. Some folks ask me, how fast have you ever gone in an F-4? And the answer is about 1,200, but it's not as exciting as it sounds. You're up 50,000 feet. The Earth and the clouds are 8-10 miles away. There's very little sensation of movement. Going 1,200 miles an hour feels exactly the way you feel right now. Not exactly exciting. You want excitement and an adrenaline, you get down low. Another F-4 pulling G's. When you start making a hard turn, the wind flow over the wing is disturbed. The temperature changes, that affects the dew point, and you get that cloud effect. Another mission in Vietnam, out of necessity, the pilot started going into a hard turn. He's pulling 6 Gs, and this G suit is squeezing my calves, squeezing my legs, squeezing my stomach. I'm sitting there grunting, and the purpose is trying to keep the blood in your brain, countering the Gs that you're pulling. And if you're not able to keep the blood up in your brain, you start to gray out. Out here, it starts to get gray. And the more blood runs out, that circle gets smaller and smaller to the point where you're looking through a straw, and then you're grayed out. You can't see. And this is what happened to me. And I was really feeling bad about that. When we got back in the debrief, I had to apologize to my pilot. And I says, look, during that long 6G turn, I just couldn't hold it. I grayed out. I couldn't see a thing. And he says, yeah, me too. You all recognize this guy, of course, right? Tom Cruise was not flying the F-18 at that point, but someone else was. But Cruise was in the plane, and you could see during the second movie, Top Gun Maverick, you could see him making the turns, and you could when he was in that canyon going in for that bomb run, and you could actually see the G's he was pulling on his face, and I could watch it closely. You knew he was in the plane. It was exactly what happens. Now, it shows him, the movie showed him pulling 10 Gs. Well, the F-18 is gauged for 7.5 Gs. So maybe Hollywood made some adjustments to the plane to allow him to pull 10 Gs, or it was just Hollywood. Also after the war, we were down in Homestead Air Force Base, the old Homestead, down in Miami. And we were going out for a practice bomb run. The weather people said everything was fine. We went out and dropped our bombs, and on the way back in, it looked like this. Homestead was locked in, and they told us to go to Miami International. And so we head in that direction, and we were flying in that fingertip close formation, and we go into a cloud bank, and the clouds are really getting thick, and the pilot's pulling in real close. We're flying 3 or 4 feet from the next guy, and the turbulence, we're taking a 40,000-pound aircraft and doing this to it, and there's static on the radio and everything, and all of a sudden we bust out into the eye of that storm, and the turbulence stopped, and the static stopped. It was a monster-sized hole, small clouds inside the hole with lightning jumping from cloud to cloud. It just seemed like we had gone someplace we weren't supposed to go. We crossed over that hole and into the other wall, and the turbulence started again. We gradually got into Miami International. We needed fuel to get back to Homestead, but the fuels contractor would not take a government purchase order. So after a lot of discussion and negotiating and everything, we finally got our fuel, but only after one of the pilots put $35,000 of aviation fuel on his American Express. Okay, we're back in Vietnam. We were flying again, going up towards Hanoi, We were spread out about a mile apart, and all of a sudden we hear on the radio, "Brake left, brake left." So my pilot starts zigzagging through the air, not really knowing what the threat was. We got that through that okay, and we got back to debrief, and that's when we found out what happened. That the weapons officer, about a mile away, was covering us, and he saw a white puff of smoke and a flash back behind our aircraft. And he looked a little bit farther back, and he saw a MiG-21, who had just fired a heat seeker that prematurely exploded. So either the North Vietnamese maintenance guys didn't set something correctly that caused the premature explosion, or a big hand came out of the sky and said, "Not today." Take your pick. Way back in '72, President Nixon was having trouble getting Ho Chi Minh to the negotiating table. And he says, Nixon said, and Kissinger said, "We're going to bomb them back to the Stone Age." So they had rows and rows of B-52s going up and hitting Hanoi at night. We were flying escort. The B-52s were flying just with other B-52s. And we were flying escort and just keeping the MiG aircrafts away from the B-52s. It was clear up above, all clouded below. We couldn't see the ground. And because I'm looking for MiGs today, my head's in the radar scope. And all of a sudden the pilot says, "I lost him, I lost him." There were two of us flying blacked out, and he lost him, he couldn't see him. And so I take my attention from the radar scope to looking for our lead aircraft, and we were in a wings level climb, and I saw the lead aircraft over to the left side in a right-hand turn. A collision was imminent. Where was my hand? Went under him. I yelled at my pilot, "Hi, 1 o'clock." And I see him, and we continued on. Now, shortly after that, I happen to be looking back over the left shoulder, and I see this great flash of light underneath the clouds, and a surface-to-air missile, a SAM, comes shooting up through the clouds, and the fuel burned out, and it went black again. I couldn't see it until it exploded. It lit up the right side of a B-52, and I actually saw the right wing fall away. Everything went dark again until the wreckage hit the ground and there was another explosion. I don't know if anybody got out. We lost 15 B-52s during the late in '72, and one of them landed in a pond outside Hanoi, and the Vietnamese decided to keep it there as a memorial of their victory over the Americans. This is my last story. We were stationed in Thailand and assigned as a recce escort again. Two F-4s going up to take pictures from the bombing yesterday, and we were flying escorts. So the four of us, the plan was we cut across Thailand, Laos, and across Vietnam out into the Gulf of Tonkin, picked up a KC-135, that's us getting fuel, and then we were going to, the 135 was going to take us as far north as he dared, and when he filled up all our tanks as much as he could, and then he peeled off and he said, "Good luck, boys." So we were heading for Ha Long Bay, and the intent was to go in low level when we hit land, follow a row of mountains up to the north of Hanoi, and then turn south directly over Hanoi and make the photography run, and then come back out and hit a 135 again for more fuel. That was our intent. This is what North Vietnam looks like. It's beautiful without the tourist boats. Our intent was to stay down low, so Hanoi was over on that side, maybe 30 miles or so. So we just didn't want them knowing we were coming. They knew. There's another shot. Hanoi was over on the left. So anyway, we're going west at this point. And the mountain range that we were hiding behind got smaller and smaller, and we got to the point where we were going through some valleys. And when we hit one of those valleys, our instruments would light up. The radar sites in Hanoi were looking at us. They knew we were coming. So we got up to that northernmost point to turn south. At that point, the external tanks were empty. We jettisoned those tanks, hit the afterburners, and started climbing up to an assigned altitude. Now, way back in those days, the cameras were such that intelligence picked the altitude that we were supposed to be at during the photography run. And they said 9,000 feet, and that would give them a good view of the whole target and the area. And they had to set the focal length on the planes for 9,000 feet. If we were anywhere else, the picture would be blurred. So anyway, we hit the afterburners and started climbing to 9,000 feet, heading straight for Hanoi. And this is what it started looking like. AAA brought down more planes in Vietnam than any other weapon system. When we got the photographs, we went over the target doing 900 miles an hour. And as far as I was concerned, it wasn't fast enough. They started shooting SAMs at us. And the typical tactic with evading a SAM was you wait, and you wait, and you just watch, and you wait until you can't wait anymore. And you turn hard into it, pulling the nose down so the missile would go over the top. And we ended up doing this 5 times. The missiles, because of the small wings on these things, they go very fast, but they can't turn. So that was the tactic. They wouldn't be able to make the turn. Once we got over the target, five missiles were shot at us. And we were in burner the whole time. When we got south of town, we were down at low level. We were at treetop level, doing 600 knots. I'm looking back over my left shoulder. I should stop looking back over my left. I look back over my left shoulder, and I see this plume of white smoke again. And a SAM came up out of the smoke, did a 90-degree turn, paralleling the ground, coming right for us. And I'm yelling at my pilot, down, take it down, take it down, little realizing that we were already at treetop level. So I watched this missile approaching, and just at that right time, pilot comes to a ridge line, and he pulls it over that ridge line, and the missile explodes on a hillside next to us. Now let's go back a few seconds. We're at treetop level, doing 600 knots, upside down. That's why I joined the Air Force. They stopped shooting at us after that ridge line, and we started climbing up to get the 135, and we were really low on fuel. We got within about a mile behind the tanker, and it suddenly got real quiet in the plane, and we watched those 2 RPM needles. We were out of fuel. It gets very quiet in the plane with no engines. So, ejection handle pull. Notice his feet pulled back away from the canopy rail. The drogue chute is automatically deployed. That pulls out the big chute. When the big chute opens, is there a little bit of a jerk? It separates me automatically from the seat, and it also deploys the life raft. It didn't seem like I was in the water or in the air for not more than 30 or 40 seconds, and I was in the water. I pulled that life raft over to me, pulled myself in, and started going through the survival kit that was there built into the raft. And maybe 15 minutes I was in the water, and I hear this Navy helicopter coming. Guy comes down on the cable, hooks me in, pulls me back up. At the same time, a Marine helicopter was doing that to my pilot. They took us, this was the HC-7 Sea Devils that picked us up. They took us to the USS Midway, which is now a museum in San Diego. Got us out of the helicopter, very busy flight deck. Some guy grabbed us both, took us straight to the doctor. Doc says, well, he looked at it. From my elbows to the bottom of my ribs, I was black and blue on both sides. I was 6'1" before the ejection and 6 foot after. But otherwise, I felt fine. They fed us steak for lunch, took us up to the bridge, introduced us to the captain. We watched some carrier takeoffs, put us on a plane, and flew us back to Thailand the very same day. I was flying the next day. All that happened during the day. This is the Midway. I have one regret in all that. That in all the excitement of the ejection, the helicopter ride, getting on the Midway and everything, that I didn't stop and turn around and thank those guys, the 4 guys that picked me up. And I have since found out the pilot isn't with us anymore. One of the crew members in the back isn't with us. The other crew member is unfindable. Only the co-pilot is alive, living in North Carolina. The Sea Devils, the helicopter squadron, is having a reunion and invited me to tell this story. The co-pilot from North Carolina is coming to the reunion, and that'll be my chance to give him a bear hug. Questions? Questions?
If you guys could bear with us, since we're recording this, if you have a question, please let me come to you and use the microphone to ask the question so we can record it, please. Okay, so you get to pick.
You can't bring the microphone to them?
I'm going to. I'm going to. Okay, first, you're set.
That one instance, you were down at treetop level and you pulled the stick. Why were you at treetop level? Your pilot was...
Believe it or not, that's the safest place to be when they're shooting at you. Picture an airliner going by at 500 miles an hour, but he's at 30,000 feet, and he's moving like that, right? At 500 feet, it's more like this. At treetop level, that's where you want to be.
So why did you have to pull up? Why didn't the pilot pull up?
When you're flying in a 4-ship formation, it's dangerous to be the last guy, because that's the one the MiGs pick on. So everybody stays line abreast. So he was probably flying like this.
what base were you at in Thailand? I was at the Rose Garden with the Marine Corps, and then I used to drive up to Udor quite often to visit my partners.
I was at Udorn. This was in '72, though.
When you ran out of fuel and had to eject, do you have to eject at the same time? Because if the pilot in the front ejected, you would get the blast of the rocket.
The seats are sequenced intentionally. The person in back goes first, canopy, and then the seat, and then the pilot. About 2 seconds later, the pilot can eject. Can't eject at the same time. There'd be collisions between the seats and the canopies, and so that pilot better hold on for 2 more seconds.
Because your hand won't be on the stick anymore, will it?
There you go.
Next question, please.
Hi, Dave.
In the D model, you didn't have the gun, so did you ever fly with a pod, or was it always the missile missions? I flew the E model, so I had a gun. So
Yeah, in later models of the F-4, they had the internal gun, but because of Navy thinking, the F-4 wasn't built with an internal gun initially. And yes, we did fly with an external gun hanging on the center line. It threw so much lead out in front that you could actually feel the plane slow down when the gun went off.
Was that 20 millimeter, 30 millimeter?
20, as I recall.
20?
Colonel, is mapping the Earth the best roller coaster ride in the world?
Say again?
Mapping the Earth, is that the best roller coaster ride in the world?
I haven't found anything to beat it.
A question over here. While I'm walking over here, a little bird told me, Dan, about you had an encounter with something. You weren't quite sure what it was? Yes? No?
Shortly after that event, the Air Force swore me to secrecy. So you'll have to promise not to tell anyone.
I promise for all these people, no one will tell.
We were flying at night, a single ship, just me and the pilot, and I was flying back seat. I don't know what the pilot was doing, but I was flying it. It was clear up above, clear down below, and I saw something out of my peripheral vision. Its movement immediately told me that we were on a collision course. The adrenaline started running. I shoved that stick forward to go under it. Heavy breathing and everything, and I'm looking up, waiting for it to see it, and nothing. And then a few minutes later, I saw it again. It was a moth in the cockpit.
I want to keep that one a secret. Hey Dan, so I can imagine that that your excitement levels during these missions were pretty high, but as a pilot you have to exercise a state of calm, so you have clarity. But I can only imagine that during your air-to-air combats. I'm curious, what was your adrenaline level, if it was measurable, during those air-to-air combats?
Very measurable. Our typical mission flying out of Thailand, we would have to hit a tanker first to refuel. And everything was pretty normal, bodily-wise, until we dropped off the tanker. And we started going faster and faster to pick it up, heading for the target area. And every time, 200 plus times, I would feel the adrenaline rush. Once we got into action, now you don't notice it. You're too busy
I mean, I'm an adrenaline junkie, so I wonder if I would actually want to experience that.
Oh, you just rent one of these things and go.
I was at UDA in 72. Were you there with Ritchie and de Bellevue? Did you fly with those guys at Triple Nickel?
There were two fighter squadrons on base, and both of them were in the other squadron, the Triple
Yeah.
Nickel. Yes.
A moth, really.
Good setup.
Okay.
Colonel, welcome home.
Thanks.
I have a question. Why is it when pilots tell a story, there we were, he's always this guy?
You should ask a pilot.
Oh, that's right, you were in back.
You never want to be out in front.
I was at Nakampanam in 69 and 71.
NKP.
NKP, yeah. Naked Fanny.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I was also at Da Nang. Da Nang was further away from the war than Thailand was. We flew into Ho Chi Minh Trail in
Yeah.
Laos.
Next question, okay, right here. And thank you very much for all the Vietnam vets. Welcome home.
Colonel, tell us your call sign and how you got it.
Chicago, because I'm from there. Couldn't wait to leave, really.
Well, why would you admit it? I said, but why would you admit it?
Because I was successful. I got out.
Any other questions, please?
Thanks for listening.